Good morning, moms of master books. I hope your week is going fantastic. I know many of you have started school. We've had some good reports. We also uh, are seeing some of the reports where, the excitement has started and now you're working through the beginning. Just encourage you to keep going. Uh, uh, the process of getting into school and the habits of schooling just sometimes takes a little bit longer, but it's encouraging to see all the fantastic reports. So, hey, let's talk today on teaching tips about perspective. Something that I want my children to develop is emotional intelligence. I want them to be able to approach life and situations objectively. And I think part of that understanding good brain, bad brain, as I would refer to it, God created us remarkably. He created in us a mechanism to recognize danger and to immediately respond sometimes before we are thinking about it. So if I put my hand on a stove and I feel heat, I pull it back automatically. My brain tells me hot, burn, pain, remove. If you're the type of person and somebody jumps out and scares you, sometimes you'll notice that some people will scream and freeze. Other people will scream and run. In my case, my kids all know, don't scare me because chances are I'm going to punch you in the face. And I don't even think about it. It's just what's going to happen. And so that would be my fight or flight mechanism that God has built into us. It helps us to protect ourselves very quickly. And we also have awareness of our situation. God has built into us mirror neurons that allow us to be sensitive to what's happening in a room. So if you've ever been in a room and something happened and all of a sudden everybody jumped or froze or maybe even yawned and you catch yourself yawning, a lot of that is the mechanism that is built into you to be sensitive to what's going on around you. It's a navigation system God wired into us so that we can respond effectively and survive in our surroundings. Well, sometimes we become conditioned to always being in that bad brain. And bad brain would be somebody comes in and says, I think, it's a state of mind. You feel it. It's kind of, you feel it in your chest. And it's more of you're always responsive to what's happening around you, as opposed to being in good brain, which is the brain that's more creative and allows you to think rationally and to solve problems. And so the key with emotional intelligence is to stay out of a bad brain perspective and stay in as good brain as possible. And sometimes when you feel bad brain happen, of course, there's a whole psychology behind why this may happen. But let's just say you come in contact with somebody who just pushes your button the wrong way immediately. You feel it. You begin to feel almost like a burn at the front of your head, and you begin to feel the emotional pain or tightness in your chest. That's a chemical dump in your brain, a cortisol dump that tells you there's pain, something's happening here, we need to respond. We either need to punch back or we need to get out of this situation and respond, and we begin to lose a creative focus. When we feel that, it's good to then identify why am I feeling that way? Why is this person making me feel that way? Have you felt that way? Can anybody relate that's watching? It's good to see some of you that have joined. Can you relate to that? Do you know what I mean when that tightness happens in your chest and you almost lose the ability to think? It's like I didn't even respond the way I would normally respond. I didn't respond Christ-like. I wasn't in a good frame of mind. And sometimes we get caught in living in that almost bad brain state more than we should. And I think it's healthy to identify, why is it that when I come in contact with this person or this circumstance or this happens to me, I immediately go into a bad brain responsive position rather than a good brain creative response, and work through that a little bit. Okay, so I want my children to understand emotional intelligence, but I have to model that. I get what I lead. And so for me, I first have to know how to be in a healthy state of mind. It's very easy sometimes with my kids even, where maybe I'll push a button, they'll respond, and all of a sudden I'm not there in good brain anymore. Or maybe with my spouse or my support network or whatever, I end up in that spot. Well, perspective, I think, is very important element of staying in good brain. Laura, when the holidays are coming, and I know I'll be interacting during that season, yeah, I think a lot of that emotional conditioning, trauma, early childhood trauma, emotional conditioning, insecurities, you name it, a lot of those things play into putting us in bad brain. Well, perspective, here's something that I've experimented with in my own life. I'm beginning with my older children to talk about it and try to get them to identify it as well. If it's helpful to you, wonderful. If not, throw it away. All right. One of my favorite movies is The Count of Monte Cristo, and in it there's a scene where Napoleon says, "Kings and pawns, emperors and fools." And for many years, I held that quote kind of tight, when I saw something happening, kings and pawns, emperors and fools. Well, I was working in a company, and I had been there quite a while and had been successful in that company. One of the boss's sons came to work for the company. I helped train him and mentored him and everything. And a position came open in the company, and they promoted my boss's son over me. And being kind of snarky and feeling the pain of that, I said, kings and pawns, emperors and fools. And my boss turned to me and immediately said, "It's because you are a pawn and he is a prince, and you need to deal with that." And that pricked, bad brain immediately, right? Cortisol dump. But I deserved for him to say that because I had snarked out at him. And it was truth. It was the world that I lived in. And I think our children need to understand sometimes that's what they're going to face. And part of emotional intelligence is understanding the field. Okay, so that mentality, kings and pawns and emperors and fools, I think at times many of us feel that way, right? That we are maybe a pawn on the game of life, or maybe we're a king. Maybe we're just, we're a piece on the board and we're just constantly being played, and we're kind of a victim to what's going on around us. Well, before I go any further, let me just say, I believe fully in the providence and sovereignty of Almighty God. I believe that he directs a man's steps. And even though a man plans his way, God directs his steps. The favor of the Lord makes one truly rich. He adds no sorrow to it. I am not discounting here at all with what I'm going to say. The role of God. God is God. I am not. And he intervenes. He certainly positions us and has amazing abilities to determine the outcomes of our lives. So let me lay that as a foundation. What he has given me is a choice. And in that choice, I can choose to determine my happiness. I can choose to move out of a situation that's painful. I can choose to identify and work with things in my life that maybe there's a sin issue, or maybe there's a fear issue, an anxiety issue, or maybe there's some issue in my life that I can work to improve and commit myself to doing better. So in saying that, one of the things that I'm beginning to do is to look at kind of I have a mental trigger that says when I begin to feel like I'm in the spot where I'm feeling kings and pawns, emperors and fools, I'm at the mercy of life, I will give myself a mental trigger that says, my life, my game. Rather than seeing myself on the chessboard as a pawn or a piece, I am trying to see myself on the chessboard as a player. And what do I mean by that? there's the pieces, right? I have different pieces. If you know chess, and I think chess is fantastic to play with your family, there's a game called Plunder Chess, which actually goes a lot faster, but uses chess. And what you actually do is in Plunder Chess is you grab the power of the other players and you put it on, and so you have for one move those capabilities. It makes it faster if you have a hard time. When you have as many kids as we do, sitting down and playing chess with 3 or 4 kids is exhausting, but Plunder Chess, I can do it in about a quarter of the time. But in chess, each of these pieces, like this would be a rook, and a rook has certain powers. It can move along the squares horizontally or vertically, but it can't go diagonally. And so there are certain limitations of a rook and certain powers of a rook. A pawn can only move forward 1 spot. It can move forward 2 spots. It captures diagonally, but it can't move backwards. It can't move in an L shape. It can't move all the way across the board. So there are limitations of a pawn. Pawns are usually the most easily disposable piece on the chessboard, and you use them strategically to protect the king or to move in a place to capture the other person's king. I certainly am no chess genius. One of the authors that Master Books had years ago worked with Answers in Genesis. He would play blindfolded. They put blindfolds on, and he would actually play games with, I forget how many people would sit and play a physical game, and he would mentally know where each of the games was and win. It was just a brilliant man. So anyways, I digress. The pawn is a chess piece. It has certain capabilities and certain powers. A king can move in any direction. It can go forward, backward, but it can only move 1 space at a time. So there's certain limitations of this chess piece. When I become a pawn, or I visually see myself as being a pawn in my life, I begin to see myself as somebody who can only make 1 step forward, is disposable, is not that valuable in the game of life. Okay? When I see myself as a rook, perhaps I see myself as somebody who has more power and more influence or value on the chessboard, but I can only move. I'm limited by the influence or the power that I have. When I see myself as a player as opposed to a played piece, I change my perspective. And in changing my perspective, I begin to have hope that there's different outcome potential. I can start developing strategy, and in developing that strategy, it gives me the capability to make things better for my family, for my children, for my students in my homeschool. And so my encouragement is that rather than seeing yourself as a king or a pawn, seeing yourself as the player. Each piece on my chessboard, where I live, the community that I live, is 1 piece of on my chessboard. There are advantages to where I live. There are disadvantages. So in essence, there are capabilities of where I live. And where I live, we live in the Ozark Mountains in the Midwest. Midwest has a fantastic culture. The Ozarks has a unique culture, and we're able to use that to help expand our children's horizons, to help our students. The nature here and all of that is incredible. So that's capability that we have in our life in our homeschool. What about my friends in my support group? Well, those have certain capabilities and certain things that I can use and strategy to help my children, help my family, and the quality of life that we have. So in those capabilities. Now, sometimes what's brilliant about this this thing we call life is that we're not bound to the pieces that we have. If I identify that maybe I need to develop some new relationships with people who speak life into my life and health over my family, that bless me, don't curse me, that are positive and good influences on my family, I can actually change this piece out and begin improving that situation. If my job is such that it doesn't meet all the needs that I have, or maybe it's always putting me into an unhealthy brain, then I can actually change that out and begin putting it into, I can begin affecting that and changing that out. Maybe even my spouse. So sometimes a spouse has capabilities, and maybe there's things that they can't do, but there are things that they do well. And see, I don't have to be victim to that. I can appreciate, I can choose joy, I can look at the positive, I can change my circumstances. So in essence, I really am a player in my own chessboard, as opposed to being constantly played. And if somebody's coming into my life and they're speaking negative and they're always forcing me into bad brain, even there, that's a piece on the board. And I can strategize. I can buffer myself from that. I can identify why it bothers me. I can confront it head on. I'm not a victim to that. I have choices. And so my trigger is my life, my game. As soon as I begin to feel my head going into a place that's bad brain and I'm beginning to react negatively, I remind myself, it's my life, my game. I can do something about this. And I want my children to identify that too. They don't have to, at 20 years old, they don't have to accept something as this is the way the rest of their life goes, and they're constantly victims to that. So even in school, right, we have a young student who's here and they're just identifying that they don't like to write. I see this, I understand it, because writing is difficult. Today I have to write a cover, inside cover for a book. I don't enjoy it. It's a creative process. My brain has to really fire up to do this. And so our brains are wired and created in such a way to conserve energy, to conserve calories. And it likes autopilot. It doesn't like having to blaze new trails and work creatively unless there's a reward. And so we have to recognize that our curriculum choices, the tasks set before us, all of this is strategically part of what we're trying to accomplish in life. Now, everything that my personal mission statement is to love God, to know him, to be known by him, to bring him glory. So the strategy that I am employing in my life with my chessboard is to make sure that all of the pieces on the chessboard are lining up to help accomplish that strategy. Again, my disclaimer is I fully understand and know the providence and sovereignty of God. And so this is not a humanistic, I am God and he is conveniently over here. This is participating in his program and plan. So I hope you understand what I'm saying here. But the choices that I have within that plan, within his capacity, are to choose to be happy, to choose to be healthy, to choose to make good choices and have good relationships, and to reach out to people. But it's hard to even do that, right? It's hard to minister to our kids or our neighbors or our family when we're not healthy. And so we have to be emotionally intelligent and emotionally healthy in order to teach our children how to be emotionally intelligent and emotionally healthy. And so being able to say, this is my life, my game, and all of the pieces that are on my chessboard, I can identify what are the pluses, what are the minuses, what are the capabilities, what are the limitations, and how can we use that to move forward and have a healthy, productive life that does bring glory and honor to the Lord. And it's even been helpful for me at times to take a piece of paper and detail out. You could take almost like a chessboard, draw some squares and put a little circle on and identify that piece. This is my neighborhood. Here are the advantages and the disadvantages to living in this neighborhood. And if I want to bring about health, stay healthy emotionally, bring about health, once I've identified what are the unhealth parts, how do I respond to that? What is the strategy for this piece on this board? Then I can move to the next, right? The career path the Lord has for us. Sometimes families are able to travel because of the job that a spouse has, or maybe they have access to certain things other people wouldn't have because of that job. Or maybe there just aren't a lot of advantages to the job right now, but that's okay. I've identified this is still a piece and it affects our lives, and this is how the strategy I can employ or not employ. Okay. And I can move through each element of that when we're talking about I know Tuesday we talked about some of the support networks and some of the critics that we have. And you know what? Sometimes we just need to be worthy of the suffering that we have. And the critics make us better because they force us to understand our arguments. They force us to learn how to stand up and defend ourselves. They teach us how to respond to the critic and to teach our children how to be healthy when we are criticized. And so maybe even the critic is a piece on the board that I understand. This person helps me. When I market Master Books, a lot of times online, I want to engage the critic because the critic immediately gives me a platform to begin to explain why the creation topic or why things are important. And so when we do advertising, it's not hard to draw in an atheist or an evolutionist into our post. We'll actually engage them, and I look at the critic as not being a thorn in my flesh, but actually being a desirable thing. It's a piece on my board, and I'm able to play with that. So my encouragement to you is today to look at your life not as that you're a piece on a board being played and you are a victim of all the circumstances and other people are playing and manipulating your life, but to change your perspective and see that, you know what, there may be challenges. This game may be difficult, but it's my game, and I can begin actually looking and developing strategies to change the outcome of my game. And then with my kids, I can actually begin teaching them that, you know, maybe you don't enjoy doing math right now, or maybe you don't enjoy doing writing. But let me explain why that's important, because as we develop writing skills, we're learning how to communicate our ideas effectively. And in doing that, it's going to be an advantage to us to do that. When we understand math, we begin to understand the world around us. Science, we understand the world around us. With history, history gives us an amazing opportunity to look at the mistakes and the successes of others, to copy the successes and avoid the failures. I mean, it's not just studying dates and times. If that's how we study history, we're all wrong. Studying history should be teaching us something. We should be learning something from us. What's the point of learning a date if it doesn't have context? And what's the point of learning something about history if we don't learn a lesson from it? So don't do school for the sake of school, right? Do school to learn, to grow, to become a better individual, to affect and influence culture and advance the kingdom of God. That's why we're learning. That's why we're doing this. It's not just to learn some dates and pass an ACT test so we can go to college and get millions of dollars in debt so we can work for the rest of our lives and do nothing. It's so that we can actually grow and become individuals that God has created us to be. There's so much potential in identifying and changing our perspective. The moment I begin to feel that I am at the mercy of everybody around me and I become a victim and I go to bad brain, I lose the creative power and ability that is built into my brain, and I need to stay out of that place. And I throughout years of homeschooling, we see so many people that kind of fall into that place. And maybe it's curriculum, maybe it's a support network, maybe it's just their own insecurities and fears and doubts. And then they get discouraged with the homeschooling process. And sometimes just tweaking that, having a mentor who's healthy, or having curriculum that helps remove friction points and helps bring about the joy of learning, which is what we really try to do with Master Books. Or maybe just coming alongside and encouraging somebody and saying, hey, you can do this. You know, we've done it. We're not perfect. We've made plenty of mistakes, and our kids have survived and they're thriving in life. They're doing well. And you can do the same. Just having somebody that'll speak that into your life is important. So I hope this was helpful. I'd love to hear your comments, even after this closes. If you were watching and you endured it through, if you would let me know, did any of this resonate? Was it helpful? I'd really appreciate hearing that. And hopefully, if there's anything I need to clarify that I said, feel free to ask a question. Certainly don't mind doing that. So we continue to pray for your family. We are as a corporation, as a company, beginning to pray for the husbands and the dads of Master Books. All the dads of Master Books and the dads represented in this group, we are praying for a special move of God in their lives. That's our prayer project for this year, and we're encouraging families to join us in that. And we are going to see some fantastic things begin to happen in families as dads get ignited to their role and responsibility and the privilege of serving their families in Christ. All right. Well, you all have a fantastic weekend, and we pray the Lord's blessing on your school and look forward to continuing the discussion with you in the future. God bless.